This show is part of the RetroZap.com podcast network.
And welcome everybody to a special episode of the Animanicast.
Friends, we'll paint any ceiling for just $29.95. Right. How do we do it? No overhead. In fact, when we get through, you'll have nothing overhead. And if you hire us, you'll have nothing in your head. We paint ceilings, and only ceilings. We don't paint floors because they're beneath us.
And welcome once again to the Animanicast. We are the only podcast out there that's dedicated to the animated series, Animaniacs. And today we have a very special episode. We have an interview and discussion with a very talented writer. But before I introduce him, I am Joey, and joining me are my co-hosts, Nathan.
Here's the show's Jamie.
And Kelly.
Hey there.
And for the first time on the show, we have with us the very talented animation writer from Animaniacs and many other cartoon series as well. It's Mr. Charles M. Howell.
Hello, here I am.
Hello, Charles. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. You have actually, of course, written many of our favorite episodes of Animaniacs, and we have several questions to ask you about your involvement in the show, and again, it just should be a lot of fun, hopefully, and I think we'll all learn something, I'm sure.
Oh, God. Yes, okay.
Yeah, we just learned a lot about Skype setting up, actually, the last hour. Boy, oh boy. Charles and we had a whole other podcast going on called the How Do We Set Up Skype Here? What's going on? It was a lot of fun.
Is that on our Patreon or what?
Yeah, we have a Patreon account. We'll do a bonus episode. No, I don't know if we'll do that. Well, anyway.
Yeah, okay.
Well, Charles, let's go ahead and get into our discussion here. First of all,
sure.
How did you get involved with writing for not just Animaniacs, but just cartoons in general? How did you get involved in the industry?
I went to Cal Arts, and I studied film, specializing in animation. I always wanted to make cartoons when I was a kid. I just, so I did animation at first, and I started out as an assistant while I was still in college, as an assistant animator, and then became an animator. And when I was first an animator, well, not for like maybe the second year, in the 70s there, I shared a cubicle with Tom Ruegger. We were there, and also Mauro Maressa, who is a great effects animator. I think he's mostly at Disney now. But we all shared a cubicle together. And, it was a time when a lot of the people who had been in animation since like the 40s or the 30s are like Tom and Jerry writers and, all these people and animators and everything. I mean, we had people like Kenny Muse coming in with his walker to pick up animation to do it. And he was great. And so then there was a whole generation. There were like 10 people 10 years younger who were like in their 50s or 60s. I mean, I'm 23 or something. So I figured I'm going to end up being an assistant animator for like 40 years because everybody's like in line. They're going to be ahead of me and everything. And Tom suggested, and then for a while I did storyboards because the way the production seasons worked, you could start off the season doing storyboards and then you could do animation and you'd work the whole year because everything, there was 3 networks only in those days and everything premiered in like September. And so you tried to do what you could. And Tom Ruegger said to me at one point, it'd be better to write. And I said, we're never like all these 80-year-old guys are writing and directing and everything. We're never going to be able to do that. But he said, yes, we will. And animating, you get scenes to animate that are like 5 seconds long. And it's all very laid out for you. The person does a head turn, the character does a head turn, and then they walk over here and whatever, and they lift their arm or whatever, especially in TV. And then with storyboards, you get a little more control. You get like an act of a thing where you're laying out. And I'd gone to film school. A lot of people who were doing storyboards were like comic book guys. And they didn't know how to lay something out so that you could actually animate it. You know, they would do like a comic book film. Anyway, so Tom said, let's try to write. And he got a job at Filmation writing. And then I went over there and we were both writing at Filmation. And he was very successful there. I got canned almost. I was there like 2 months or something and I got canned. I don't know. I never got along with the guy who was the head of the right. I mean, I thought I was getting along with him, but he was always very weird toward me. And I thought somebody said later that it's because I'm gay and that he was uncomfortable. But you know, I wasn't like making passes. I mean, I was just being like me. Anyway, he did can me pretty quickly. And Tom, at some point, got hired over at Hanna Barbera, and he was the assistant to the guy who was the head writer on Scooby-Doo. And the guy says to him, "Just hang on, because I'm going to quit, and you'll be the new head writer of Scooby-Doo." This is Tom's first writing job, and it's after Filmation, and so the guy quit, and Tom was there, and I started getting. He said, "Come over here," and whatever. And so I started writing Scooby-Doo episodes for Tom Ruegger. Wrote a whole bunch of them that first couple of years. So that's how I got in. And then I've worked for other people. But when Tom went over to Warner Brothers in the late 80s, I think maybe 1990, I followed him over there and started writing. You know, Steven Spielberg had made this deal with Warner Brothers Animation, and he wanted to do an animated show. And you know, TV animation in those days was very limited and everything. And I mean, there were some great shows done, but and so Steven Spielberg wanted to do a fully animated show, fully scored, all these things, and funny stories like the old Warner Brothers cartoons with references that, the people who get the references, that's great. But the cartoon is a 5-year-old can watch the cartoon and be entertained, but older people can get some of the jokes or references that younger kids can't get. So anyway, so we started doing that. And it was Tiny Toons at first, which was designed to be, it was actually going to be younger versions of the regular Warner Brothers characters. It was going to be like young Bugs Bunny, young Daffy Duck. And Tom told me that they had pitched this. I don't know, maybe he's told you this too. And the merchandising people at Warner Brothers said, we have signed contracts for Bugs Bunny merchandise for like 20 years. This story got rid of Daffy Duck and everybody. If it's young Bugs Bunny, they will say they already own it. So, or they already have the rights to that. So it was just turned into like Buster Bunny and Plucky Duck. But we were essentially writing those characters, and we just had fun with that. And then after that, the Animaniacs happened, and then we were able to be a lot more free with what we were doing and everything, and just sort of entertain ourselves. So there I was, and I'm glad that I made friends with Tom and Gene McCurdy, great. There are executives and network people and stuff who micromanage. They're going to rewrite every joke. They're going to do everything. And it's just horrible. Gene McCurdy and Steven Spielberg, you hire the people you like, that you think are entertaining, and then you let them do what they do. And Steven will steer us, and he would say, well, maybe let's not do another one like that. Maybe to do something, whatever. But then he would basically leave us alone. And so it was just a real pleasure, and it spoiled me in a way. I mean, I haven't had an experience like that since. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great. And then I went on to Pinky and the Brain, and Peter Hastings was the head writer for its first season, and then he left for Disney. And then I took over that. My writing partner and I, Gordon Bresack, had written several Pinky and the Brain cartoons for Animaniacs. And so, and Gordon was off doing his own series. He sold a series called Captain Simeon and the Space Monkeys, which didn't get much play here. It did well overseas, but they couldn't get the toy. It was Hallmark and Mattel, and they couldn't get the toy into Toys R Us. It was a competitive year for boy toys. Anyway, so we did 2 seasons of that, and then I was able to get him to come back and work on Pinky and the Brain toward the end. But so this is a basic life story. Anything else?
Well, I think we're all wrapped up here now. No, I'm kidding, of course.
There we go. Good night, everybody.
No, thank you. No, that's a great rundown of exactly how you got in. Kelly, you mentioned someone very important right there in there. Do you have a follow-up question for him?
What did you have a lot of one-on-one interaction, or person-person interaction with Spielberg, or do you have any interesting stories to share about him?
No, I met him, and other like Tom Ruegger met him a lot more. But I met him on occasion. I don't really have any stories. I mean, that one thing about him saying that the third mouse, that he had film students who wouldn't.
We talked about that right before we started recording. Tell us, again, real quick about that, because I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, Spielberg said at one point we were doing we were looking for Orson Welles things because Brain's voice is kind of based on Orson Welles, and so we were doing, we did various things that took his movies and parodied them. And we came up with doing The Third Mouse, because the third Man is one of his great films. And so we did that, and we did all the jokes we could think of, that we could do, parodying the scenes from that. And Steven Spielberg said later, he said, I have film students who don't get the references in that cartoon. But we entertained ourselves, and it was a good cartoon. We did it in black and white. And I think except for Pinky's nose or something, which was in red. It was a lot of fun to do that. One of the most fun cartoons that Gordon and I wrote.
It is so sad.
Her brain's passing.
Where?
I give up.
Poor Brain. He loved rainy days so. He would laugh and say the sky was crying.
Yes, and then he hit you on the head with a pencil. Oh, those were the days. Have you seen him lately?
Why, no. Why do you ask? Why would I see him? What are you suggesting? What do you know?
The lyrics to Yakko's Well.
Please, no!
Well, first of all, let's talk about just comedy in general. Who were some of your biggest influences when it comes to writing and or comedy in general?
Well, the Warner Brothers cartoons, for one thing, the old Warner Brothers, the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, but also, I Love Lucy was a favorite show of mine, and then as I got a little older, Kaufman and Hart's plays and some stuff like that, where you just get a feeling for it. I mean, you don't really learn it in terms of a specific craft, but you sort of learn what makes you laugh and what's funny, and you kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm. That's what a lot of the writers kind of said, is that they kind of just, and again, I think you essentially speaking to this as well, that you wrote about what made you laugh as a kid and what you just really thought was funny. There was never really a thought when you were writing Animaniacs that, will the kids not get this reference, things like that. There
was some times where you said this is too obscure, or at the end of Pinky and the Brain, then we started getting network involvement, and they started getting more, and so we had to think. They wanted us to parody things that kids would be familiar with more. So that's when we did Brainy the Pooh and the Star Wars episode and things like that. and on Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain, we did a thing where they take a trip to Disneyland and so. But we were still putting in jokes that amused us. We did. Brain was just hated going to Disneyland, and Pinky was so excited by the ride, and so then we did one where Brain was going to pick what they were going to go to next, and it was the Hall of the Secretaries of State, and he came out of the saying, "Boy, that Dean Rusk animatronic was just really great," and Pinky at that point like, okay. So we still put in jokes that we like.
Can I go on a ride now? I'll take that as a yes. Whee! Oh, Brain, I love the teacup ride.
Pinky, get out of that woman's teacup.
Oh, sorry.
But I Love Lucy and the Warner Brothers cartoons, and they've served me well. I've been doing some acting lately. Mm-hmm. I've been doing some Shakespeare around town here in Los Angeles, and they asked me on one thing. I was auditioning or whatever. They said, "Can you play a drunk?" I said, "Sure." And there's a character in the Taming of the Shrew. No, Measure for Measure. There's a character called Barnardine, he's got one scene. You've got a 1 2-minute scene. So I did what I never said this to them there because it's Shakespeare, but I basically did Vitamita Vegemin, Daffy Duck, and it was like Daffy Duck doing Vitamita Vegemin. They loved it, and I did my scene, and the LA Times actually mentioned me as one of the great comic supports in the production. So I Love Lucy and the Warner Brothers cartoons really are it.
Oh, fantastic. That's so funny. Nathan's wife is a Shakespearean actress as well, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mostly in Phoenix now, but
yeah.
She hasn't done anything in LA yet. But
I'm doing small theater here. I mean, it's still small theater. You just got a lot of actors here, so there's people who want to do this. But what has your wife done?
She was in the Southwest Shakespeare Company down in Phoenix, so she did Merry Wives of Windsor, and she was in Much Ado About Nothing.
Merry Wives?
Merry Wives? She was one of the wives.
Ford or Mistress? Was Mistress Ford or Mrs. Ford?
She was the one with the daughter, which I don't know. I think that was Ford.
Mistress Page.
Page. Okay, there we go. So,
and Page. Yeah. Who Slender is with.
That was.
Yeah. So that's a great.
Oh yeah, they had a lot of fun with that one.
And speaking of which, I think they didn't the director kind of put that Merry Wives of Windsor in a kind of I Love Lucy-esque kind of direction. It was a blending of I Love Lucy and Merry Wives of Windsor. So it was like you're watching kind of a sitcom-ish 1950s Shakespeare thing. It was really cool.
You see comedy grow from, Aristophanes wrote these great comedies, and then you come up to Shakespeare, and everybody's building. Is it Aristophanes? Yeah, I think he's a comic playwright. And everybody's building on sort of what went before, and you can see some of their structure and some of their kinds of jokes and stuff going all the way through up to I Love Lucy and up to Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. So comedy's kind of a timeless art. The only thing that changes are the references. If you're doing something with contemporary references, those might be a little tough. And if you're doing wordplay, Aristophanes comedies have a lot of puns in them, and you have to have footnotes to read them. But they were really clever puns, just like we would do on one of our shows. Back then they were clever puns. Now they're written in Greek, so what are you going to do?
Yeah, some puns do not quite last the thousands of years if it's
they do. They don't translate. The fact that two words are similar in a language, or not when you go to another.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I had noticed you would helped write Hard Day's Warner, and I remember reading in the notes that Spielberg didn't like the violence, and a lot of violence had to be cut out of the episode. Do you remember anything about that? Or
I don't remember in that. I think what we did in that episode pretty much stayed intact. We would get notes from time to time. Spielberg doesn't like the characters arguing that much, or something, and so we'd pull back. I did one Goodfeathers cartoon to the dump. And I wrote this thing, and of course we looked at Goodfellas, and I watched Goodfellas over and over again to write that cartoon, and I put in a bit that with, there's the Joe Pesci thing in Goodfellas, what am I, a comic here to amuse you? So I did a thing about a lifesaver. He pulls Squid or whatever the character out of the water because they're going to get, those 6-pack rings stuck around them and everything. And he pulls Squid out of the water, and Squid says, "Oh, you're a lifesaver." And so I did a thing. I'm a lifesaver? What am I, a fresh minty candy here to amuse you? And I went back and forth. That was pulled out of the episode because Sherry Stoner, who was editing, said, Stephen doesn't want them arguing so much. So she put something else in there that I thought was really lame. But then later, there was another Goodfeathers cartoon that she used. And I guess that particular dictum eased up a little bit. So she put my lifesaver bit in one of her Goodfeathers cartoons, which always kind of pissed me off, frankly, because she's getting credit for that. But that's what happens, Everybody's working to do things, and she took it out because she thought she had to take it out at the time, and then she was able to use it later. So there were times when he would say, I don't want the characters arguing so much, or things like that, but sort of just as general notes.
Okay.
And we would, Gordon and I wrote Hooked on a Ceiling, which we were told at the time, Tom Ruegger said, this is the template for how the Warner Brothers and sister cartoons ought to go. But then suddenly, after that, we turned in like our next thing. Stephen says that they're like heckling too much, that they shouldn't just be annoying, that you had to do. So, but Hooked on a Ceiling got in where they're basically heckling Michelangelo. And then after that, we tried to shake it up, and there was more, there were different kinds of things, and but Hooked on a Ceiling is a cartoon that I'm particularly proud of. And Gordon and I had a lot of fun writing that one.
It's my favorite.
Is it?
Yeah.
Thank you. We had a lot of fun doing that, and Stephen makes a little guest appearance, which we were told when we turned it in. Stephen's sick of us having him, as a joke in a cartoon or whatever. He says he just doesn't want. He says, it's too much. We can't do that all the time. And we said, I don't know. We had that gag at the end where E.T. and God are doing their thing, whatever it was, and Steven Spielberg. And so we have to do this joke at the end. We have to do the thing where, he's coming, the most important, he's coming, he's going to judge this, he's going to whatever. And then you see that you pan up and you see that it's Steven Spielberg. So there's nothing, His Eminence is coming to look at the painting. We have to get everything ready for His Eminence, whatever. And then you pan up and you see that it's Steven Spielberg. And we said, what are you going to do to substitute for that? So that one got in, and I think it worked.
Yeah, I think it makes the episode.
Yeah. What do you do if you can't do that as a punchline? So
Don't worry, Mike. You go say howdy. We'll finish up.
Your Eminence. I'm so glad you could come. I've worked so hard to please you. I hope you like my ceiling. I'm ruined!
like it.
Hey, Mikey, he likes it. Painting is like show business. You have to know your audience.
I'm curious what inspired you to write the episode to begin with. You know, the idea of the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo.
Tom Ruegger gave us a lot of like names of people that they could go in and annoy, and Tom said, you know, maybe Michelangelo, he's painting the Sistine Chapel and he needs assistance, he needs help, so he hangs out the painters wanted, and they go in as house painters and do all that, and so that was the basic idea, and then Gordon and I went off and wrote it. It was like a one-sentence thing from Tom. It was a really good idea. And then we just, you know, we did some Animaniacs comic books at one point. And Gordon and I got a reputation among the fans of the comic books for doing a lot of puns and for doing a lot of, you know, those are cheap jokes or whatever. So, but we did a lot of those in Hooked on a Ceiling and in a lot of our stuff. Whatever made us laugh.
On the Animaniacs DVD featurette, it's called The Writers Flipped. You stated that working at Warner Brothers at the time was one of the times working on a cartoon was described as fun. Now, you also, however, said that you broke things writing Broadcast Nuisance, and Gordon Bresick said that you guys were considered troublemakers inside the building, and they wouldn't let you inside the building. I don't know. Is this?
He's just. We got a deal where we could write at home and still get a staff salary.
Okay.
And turned that around and said, "Oh, well, we were troublemakers. They wouldn't let us inside the building." That's not really true.
Okay.
We just we got a deal where we could work from home, and it was a lot of fun. It also sort of, I don't know, we did it because we thought it would be easier and everything. But what happens is you're kind of out of the loop. People in the building are kind of meeting with each other and talking to each other all the time. And we did feel after a while that we were kind of, you know, a little disconnected from everything that was going on. But we had fun anyway. And, you know, you say writing was fun on this. Every cartoon is fun in some ways. I mean, it beats digging ditches, you know. And I had fun on Scooby-Doo. I had fun writing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Gordon and I just recently did a show called Word Girl, which is a hilarious show. We had a lot of fun writing that. So, you know, I mean, I think Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs really were special. But this is a fun thing to do for a living.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a job that I know many people are envious of, to be able to get a chance to do that. Nathan, what kind of question do you have?
So I see that you wrote the Don't Tread on Us on the Animaniacs show. It's the Pinky and the Brain episode. Right. I think we're going to talk about it next week, actually. But did you write that before you started writing for Pinky and the Brain, or was that as you were writing?
That was a Pinky and the Brain cartoon for Animaniacs. Because, you know, Pinky and the Brain came along later.
Yeah, well, I think it's when that aired on Animaniacs, it was Pinky and the Brain was airing at the same time. So I'm just wondering if you had written that for Animaniacs before you'd started writing for Pinky and the Brain.
It was a show with all these segments in it. We had the Warner Brothers, Warner Sister, and then we had Pinky and the Brain. And there was a lot of things, you know, the Hippos and all these other good fellas, good feathers. And so, yeah, Pinky and the Brain, we wrote a lot of those to be used in Animaniacs. But there was a point where the WB was starting up. The Warner Brothers, they were starting up their own network. And there was talk that maybe Steven would get a Pinky and the Brain show on as a separate primetime show. So there was a point where Tom Ruegger said, we're just going to write a bunch of Pinky and the Brains for Animaniacs. Because if the show sells, we've got a bunch of stuff ready to go. And if the show doesn't sell, we can put them all in Animaniacs. So we just wrote a lot of Pinky and the Brains at that point. And there was when you said Don't Tread on Us, that's the one, the colonial where they go George
Tries to change the Constitution. And
yes, we put a gag in that we really liked, but it got taken out. As they're getting off the boat, Brain says something like, "Here we are, Pinky. It's the land of the free and the home of the brave." And we did a zip pan over to an Indian, a Native American, and a black man in chains. and they got the Indian, the black man says, "I'm not buying it." And the Indian says, "I have my reservations." And then we zip pan back to them. And Tom said, "Oh, you know what? It's a funny gag, but somebody's mom is going to be walking through the room and they're going to say, well, what was that horrible thing of a black man in chains or whatever? So we can't do that gag." So the gag came out. But we thought, I have my reservations. I'm not buying it with those two people. We really loved that. We were sad to see it taken out. But I think Tom was right. That's the kind of thing that people, just see and they just think it's horrible. So
yeah.
Stay tuned for these words from our lovely sponsor.
Way to kiss up, Dot.
The kids of the 70s and 80s are all grown up, but the good times of childhood don't have to end.
Our generation can share the fun and fandom of our youth with the next generation and bring the past into the future.
And wrap it all up to make a fantastic present.
Join Jedi Schwa and Chef's Bazaar every Monday morning to get your work week started by reminiscing about the past and exploring the future with your earbuds on Techno Retro Dads.
So find us on iTunes, Facebook, Twitter, or on RetroZap.com. Part of the RetroZap Network.
Hey, Robert, why should people listen to another retro gaming podcast?
You mean our cast, David? We do have to keep this short,
Yes, well, I guess we should start with the fact we celebrate old school video games.
And we have awesome guests and game giveaways. Don't forget that.
Plus our game show and your favorite segment, Random Select.
Don't remind me. Are we done yet?
Listen to our cast, another retro gaming podcast, part of RetroZap.com.
Finally, back to my beer.
It seems it's time to return to Kids WB.
Are there any characters that you wish had gotten more screen time?
We were lucky to write mostly for the Warner Brothers and Warner Sister and for Pinky and the Brain. And what can you say? I mean, Pinky and the Brain was interesting because there really were very few supporting characters. It was just them in most episodes. There weren't many guest star parts over the course of that. So, anyway, no, we didn't. I can't think of anybody who. I mean, I wish I was still writing Pinky and the Brains. I wish that went on and on and on, and we could still be doing it. But as far as within the shows that were done, I can't think of any characters that got more screen time. I only wrote a couple of. I wrote a Slappy Squirrel thing, and I think maybe Gordon and I wrote one together.
Rest in Pieces, I think.
I wrote Rest in Pieces. Yeah, that was me. And Gordon and I wrote another one together. But frankly, I enjoyed Pinky and the Brain so much. I love those two characters. They're really they're both such complex characters, and my God, we got so lucky with the actors on that. Mo LaMarche, I think, was the heart of that show because he always failed, and Pinky, of course, was zany and crazy, and so it was just they just worked off each other so well, and we were just incredibly fortunate to have those two actors, and of course Tom created Pinky and the Brain, and so I mean, honestly, I could do with less of the hip hippos. And some of those Mindian buttons, I don't know. I just feel so lucky that I got to work on Pinky and the Brain so much.
They really were kind of like an Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel combination, weren't they? In a way that, I mean, Brain is kind of the leader, I suppose, of the two. However, and just like Oliver Hardy would be considered like the alpha personality in the Stan Laurel combination, but he's just as bad as Pinky, really, when it comes to it, isn't he? I mean, he's just like a little kid, has to get his way, and
he's a 5-year-old. I would get writers who would try to make them like a couple, like it's a gay couple or something, and that's not what they are, and it cheapens them. Pinky is like a 5-year-old, and he tags along with the brain because it's so fun to, he will do anything, and but I think they were a little more complicated than Laurel and Hardy because Brain, the thing about him wanting to take over the world, and he failed every week. He failed every show, and which gives it a lot of emotional heart. But also, he's doing something that you really don't want someone to do. I mean, Adolf Hitler tried to take over the world. That's really not a sympathetic thing, and yet. With the Brain, it was we cared about him,
Mm-hmm.
and Pinky did whatever. Look, I'm tearing up thinking about these characters. They are such great characters, and that show had so much heart to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there you go on that question. But people have compared them to Laurel and Hardy. People have compared them to Ralph Cramden and Norton, and it's one of those classic partnerships, but it has its own depth, and it has its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It wasn't just about gags. It was about those characters.
You mentioned Maurice LaMarche, and did you ever have a chance to sit in any of the recording sessions for any of those?
Yeah, I went into all the recording sessions of when by the time I was a producer and head writer, I went to all the recording sessions. I didn't go to all of them when I was just writing, but when I was a producer and head writer, I went to all of them. Basically, I don't think I missed any.
Mm-hmm.
And he's great, and Rob, they're both great people too. They're both really nice people to work with, and yeah.
Going back to just general writing for shows, I guess I just want to, I noticed you have like single episode of Darkwing Duck and a single episode of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Is it how do you get into? Is it weird writing for a show that you're not
no,
the whole series of it, or
when you're between, I would get things like, the Snorks, for instance, and you're writing the whole season, you're writing for the whole season of that. But then when you're sort of between things, you call people and you try to pick up single episodes. I liked Darkwing Duck and I liked Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I just was, on both of those, I was kind of in between things at Hanna Barbera. I think those were both while I was at Hanna Barbera, and a single episode of Johnny Quest, which was also Hanna Barbera, but it was it was between seasons of other things.
Okay.
But all those were fun shows to work on, and actually Gordon was a story editor on Darkwing Duck, and that's how I happened to get script assignments there. And I actually did 2 scripts for Darkwing Duck because they thought it was going to be picked up for another season. So there was a second script that I did, and that never got made. And but no, I did 2 things for them, and so it's always fun. And those are great. Those were all great shows. Those were all great properties, as we say. They were all. Johnny Quest was a great thing. Darkwing Duck. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which keep rebooting and redoing new things. And I got to do the one that's kind of where we introduced the female turtle, Mona Lisa, and that was a lot of fun to do. And I feel kind of privileged that I got to write that one. But
Charles, you mentioned Gordon Bresek quite often. What is the collaboration like between you two? What is it like to work with Gordon in a I was going to say in a writing room, but I guess at your house or wherever you happen to be?
My house, his house. We would go back and forth. He's a very funny guy. And I think the key to a good partnership is he and I procrastinate well together. You know what I mean? We like old movies, and we like, so we can talk about all that kind of stuff, and then get around to the actual writing. But we hang out well together, and we wrote together. I mean, I guess some writing partners are like somebody does something and then they give it over to the other person. I don't know, but he and I always wrote in a room together. We just would make each other laugh. We would just crack each other up, and then if it's funny, you put it into the cartoon. So I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
You had mentioned a few moments ago talking about the Turtles constantly being rebooted. Well, do you have any thoughts about the Animaniacs revival / reboot?
All the rebootings of any of these properties happen because some executive wants to do it, obviously, and it's a good thing to do it. And usually, in order to sell it, they get, we're going to get, so and so to some guys like a hot writer from some TV show or something to come in. So, unfortunately, the original writers usually don't get to work on these because they bring in somebody who's like the hot new thing, and he's going to hire his friends because he's going to hire the people that he has fun working with. And so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it comes out. I mean, some of the Scooby reboots have been great, and so we'll see what happens with it. I think it's good characters always live. They just they will just keep coming back. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's an Animaniacs reboot primarily, isn't it? They'll probably do some of the Pinky and the Brains and stuff, but it's an Animaniacs. Yeah.
Apparently, Pinky and the Brain will be in every episode. I think we read somewhere about that, but I don't know.
They said that in the press release, I believe.
Yeah.
The details are few and far between.
I don't think it's been really worked out yet. So It's just kind of new. So I'm sure all that will change. I hope Mindy and Buttons aren't around, but I mean, there's some of the it's like, well, we could do with.
Yeah, there's no mention of hip hippos for some reason.
Yeah, thank God. At one point, though, I had a lot of Peter did the first season, which was 13 episodes. And I think he had a whole year or more. I think he had like 14 months and whatever to do 13 episodes. Then he left. When the tough get going, when the going gets tough, the tough get out of town. He went over to Disney and did some great things there. And I was put in charge of the show. And I had 1 year to do 52 episodes, 52 half hours. So I had to do one a week, which was really tough because they're not. I mean, you can say there's a formula to it because he fails every week, but you got to come up with a good situation for him every single week and a good twist at the end and everything. And I do remember Tom Ruegger saying, I don't think he was serious about this because he was sort of on my ass about getting these done. I didn't do them in 52 weeks. About a year and a half it took us to do them. And Tom said something about you just got to crank some of these things out. How do you think we got so many Mindy and Buttons? That was his. He was joking, but he wanted us to work faster, and you just got to come up with a good story. And we would have, we'd have writers come in, and they'd submit something, a story idea, and all of them thought that it was about what his plan was to take over the world. And they would come up with these kind of Rube Goldberg things. You're going to do this and it's going to cause this to happen or whatever. It's not about that. It's about what situation are we going to see him in for the length of the show. And then we'll work backwards. And I would always suggest them, speaking of I Love Lucy, I would always suggest to them, Lucy in a vat of grapes. Do you know that episode?
Yes.
famous episode where she's in a vat of grapes, or Vitamin to Vegemin. We're tuning in to see our star in a great, funny situation. And then we'll come up with why he's going to take over the world by doing that or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That was my approach to writing the show.
Well, Charles, I think we've just scratched the surface on how all this, but unfortunately we've run out of time already. It feels like we just got started. But my goodness, we're going to be talking about Pinky and the Brain episodes and into the future. So, thank you so much for being on, and we'd love to have you on again. We can tell just by talking with you that you really do care about the characters that you wrote about, and they really are dear to your heart. And again, just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about how you wrote them and the whole process.
If I said anything mean about anybody, cut it out.
Oh yeah, don't worry. We'll take out that whole rant at the beginning. Don't worry. But before we wrap things up completely, tell us what have you been working on recently that we might be know about?
I've been such a dilettante with this acting thing. I got some financial freedom from doing Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs, and so I've been doing this acting thing, and I played Polonius in 2 different productions of Hamlet. That's another character that I care about a lot. And and so I'm doing that, but it doesn't pay much money. But yeah, so that's what I've been working on. You're in this business to enjoy yourself, and sometimes it pays money, and sometimes it doesn't. If you can get away with doing something that doesn't pay a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any upcoming productions that our audience, if they live in the you live in the LA area, correct?
I do. No, I don't do anything at the moment. I don't. I have a play that I'm trying to write, and so that's what I'm really doing lately. Mm-hmm. Like in the recent weeks. So yeah. So there it goes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, Charles, once again, thank you so much for being on. We really do appreciate you on as we continue to explore the Animaniacs series and beyond. So just, again, it's been a real honor having you on, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for asking me. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Well, Nathan, Kelly, I think it's time we get to some contact information. Nathan, where can people get in contact with you online?
Hey, Joey, I'm on Twitter. I'm surprised you didn't know this. Django FT. I think you follow me. So
that's true. I keep forgetting every week, and yet I have to keep asking you. And what? I also forgot Kelly's contact information as well. So, Kelly, where can people get in contact with you online?
I'm on Twitter at Yoda Princess, YODAPRNCSS, or email me, Kelly@BigShinyRobot.com.
Okay, writing this down this time. I forgot it already. I'll ask you next week.
Either one of you want to, Joey's a friend on Facebook, so you can, we're common friends or whatever. You can get that information from his page. And there you go.
Yes, and get Charles is on Facebook, but tries to stay away from Twitter and other
it's
things.
It's just too much. It's too much to do all those things, and Twitter and Instagram and this and that. And so no, absolutely friend Facebook.
Alrighty. Well, and as for the Animanicast in general, well, we're on Facebook too. You can join us on Facebook. You can join us on Twitter and Instagram. We are on all those social media things. And of course, you can also email us as well at animanicast@retrozap.com. And speaking of retrozap.com, well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the home of the Animanicast archive. So you should head on over there. And while you're there, you can see all the great other podcasts and articles and all the other information that retrozap.com has in general. Just every kind of pop culture item is there waiting for you. So check it out, retrozap.com, and subscribe to the RetroZap podcast feed on your favorite podcast player, and you can listen to this podcast and all the other 21 podcasts that RetroZap has to date. And growing, because by the time this comes out, we might even have 22. I don't know. So, with that, For Nathan and Kelly and Charles, this is Joey saying good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
This podcast is not endorsed by Warner Brothers or Amblin Entertainment and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Animaniacs, the Warner Brothers logo, all names, pictures, and sounds of the Animaniacs characters or any other Animaniacs-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Warner Brothers, Amblin Entertainment, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of the Animanicast unless otherwise indicated.
Nobody gets in to see the wizard, not nobody, not no how.
But I'm Michelangelo.
The witch is Michelangelo? Well, now that's a ceiling of a different color.